Hey guys, welcome back for another video on Battlefield 5. So at the recent event in Stockholm that we went to, I had an opportunity to interview David Sirland. I've known David for a little while through, basically from Battlefield 4 I guess, and we have talked throughout that time about the game, the multiplayer, the direction, the team play, all of these things. So I wanted to catch up with him and talk to him about Battlefield 5, some of the choices that have been made, and so the audio that you'll hear from here on is the audio live from the event where I interviewed him and asked him a variety of questions. Team play is something that you focused on heavily to bring more tactical consistency back in the game. While I feel from my experiences with working with your squad that's very beneficial, many people in my videos say that players who end up running solo are then punished too heavily by the attrition system. Do you feel this is the case, and how would you respond to that?
Short answer, no. I don't think that's the case. We want to reward you for playing as a squad. Squad play, team play is the bigger sibling of that, I guess, but squad play, we focus on the squad, making sure that whatever the intricacies of that was, that's the best way to play the game. The most fun way to play the game, the most rewarding game to play the game. So it's both the positives and less of the negatives, right? But also for the solo player, there's a bunch of follow-up things that make you able to play the game your way anyways. There's both the pick-up ammo loot from players, but it forces you out in the open, so that is a risk. We don't want you to sit in a corner and sulk alone. We want you to move around, like that's part of it, right? So yes, it forces you slightly to change your playstyle if you're a solo player that just does that. But this is a game about two teams duking it out, and one team is supposed to win. So what we really want is for you to find others like-minded. You could stay in a squad, you don't have to play together, still get some of those benefits. There's ways around these, but we bet pretty heavily that those are in the minority, and a heavy minority, compared to the people that would really enjoy having good squad play happen to them. Because it's not something that just magically happens. It needs to be set up through the game, but then also have people of like-minded interest. And hopefully we can create that again. That was always the case in really old games in this franchise, where that was sort of, you had to do that or you failed miserably. That might be too harsh for today's climate and more approachable world. But in general, that's what we're going for. We want to get back to some of that heart, but with a much easier learning curve.
Attrition also initially seemed a really strong and maybe controversial concept. Mm-hmm. While you're keeping it in the game and have been really vocal about that, do you feel that in order to placate some parts of the community, you've had to already dilute it to the point that it's got far less impact than it had before? Is that a problem?
I think what you're referring to is, for instance, the open beta that had a harsher attrition setting. I think even the closed alpha one had even harsher one. The idea with attrition is always for that to be it's essentially a systemic driver for all the other systems, right? And we want it to be impactful, yes, but not annoying to as many people as possible. So we want to create those longer term loops. When you think of a vehicle, for instance, they need to think about the next fill up of ammunition if they survive that long. Where's my nearest fill up? And have a route that plays around that, which creates those nice circles in the map where people play. And the same as we did in the past with refills in airfields, we now have skyhooks for airplanes to do that, and the same for players with the supply stations or their squad mates, which makes them mobile, which is why you should play with your squad mates. I think in some ways, sure, we diluted it a bit if you like the harsher setting. That doesn't mean that we would never go back to that, or in certain modes, or in certain layouts of certain game modes and certain maps, that is a harsher setting already, because we want that sort of flavor differential. We don't want it to be just exactly the same all the time. We want you to think. I think that's the key here. We want this to be a thinking shooter, where at least you think about your next step, and picking A or B should be a strategical decision, not just something that happens. So I think what we have for launch is it's easier to swallow for the general public, but it has an impact for sure, especially if you're successful. If you are a really good player, you are going to feel it. Hopefully not get annoyed by it. That's the goal. So I think in some ways you're not incorrect, but in others I think we find a nice balance here. And this is going to be an ongoing thing for sure. It depends on the meta, I think. We expect people to start playing this game in ways that we haven't foreseen. Give it some time, and then we will most likely have to change these kind of system balances as well, across the board.
And when we're thinking about resupplying as well, the fact that now, for example, with ammo boxes, when you place them down, you actually have to interact with the ammo boxes and, of course, picking up ammo and all these kind of things. Do you feel that interrupts the pace of the gameplay too much?
Yes, it does interrupt the gameplay. That's the point, though. We want it to be a risk reward. It's one, do I go to that box over there and pick up things and risk getting shot at, or don't I and go for the safe supply depot at my flag and retreat? That's a choice we want you to make. And in general, that's why we do those kind of things. Also, it's much easier to read what you're doing as a secondary person when I see you reach down and actually physically grab something than that just magically happening. So I think from a readability standpoint and that's why we want it to be interruptible.
Why did you guys decide to put Battle Royale into Battlefield 5 when the game is team play focused, pivoting to a mode which by its design is essentially a more self-orientated mode? Now, the Battle Royale in Battlefield 5 is squad-based, but even if you can't confirm it, people heavily suspect that you're going to go with a single-only BR mode eventually. It's obvious that streamers want this, but doesn't it also fundamentally undermine the core focus of the game? And worse, does it even threaten to instill like a single-minded, fairly selfish nature in the player base that basically is the core of Battle Royale? Why do you guys feel that Battlefield needs to have this when the core of the game is so strong, and that putting this in could actually undermine where you're trying to go with the main rest of the game?
In some ways, yes, that could be a worry. I think any experience that diverges from the base, or I should say the classic base, because that's what we're talking about here with the team play and strategic refocus, I should say, with this game. No, I don't think it undermines it. It could absolutely create that problem. The goal here is to broaden the player base and have something. We have a really tight-knit core in this game to a point where we feel we can do almost anything probably in the FPS genre. Battle Royale fits us very nicely because we're already huge. We're already catered for distances. We have a bunch of cool systems no one else has with destruction and that kind of stuff. So we felt this is a nice experience to try for sure. And of course, yes, there are downsides to doing that. But hopefully we also think that if you want a selfish game, if we ever go for solos in Firestorm or similar, if you play the selfish game, you do it there, right? As long as it's very clear what the experience is about that you're about to play and why you play it. Like you play Conquest, you play it to win as a team. But if you play...
I think people know that.
No, but that's something we can teach them for sure. They might not know that now, but I think this game is going to teach them a lot when it comes to that. And I think they're going to enjoy it more. Especially a bunch of the majority of players will enjoy the actual team play happening over the run and gun solo mindset. I think that is a shallower form of it. But then the tension of a battle royale, that's totally unique since you only have one life. We have a mini version of it already in the game with Final Stand, which is sort of the crescendo of the grand operations. And that becomes a team version of it, if you will. So there's marriages here that could work, but it's very time limited and it's very small. And in the general sense, I'm not too worried this is going to overshadow what is the base of Battlefield at all. I think it might bring in new players that might start actually appreciating the other thing as well, because I feel the quality is there to do that.
The UI is one of the things that seems currently the weakest element of the game. It seems pretty clunky, and I'm talking about mainly with your sort of weapon setups and stuff like that. It seems more complicated maybe than it needs to be, and I'm sure that you could patch this or give it passes later. Are there existing plans to optimize it? And more importantly, do you want to allow people to adjust their weapon progression and more of those elements in-game than you have right now?
Yeah, number one, UI, when you talk about changing things being clunky, that's most likely the front-end parts of things. It's fairly deep. There could be more shortcuts. Yeah, you have to go in and go out. And yeah, of course, we will keep improving that for sure. There's just a lot of pieces to this game. We had to simplify to make sure it all ticks together. And yes, we do want you to be able to do this in-game. You can do this in-game at launch between rounds. So you have unlocks happen end round, or they are actually given to you end round. You might unlock a gun in the round, but the next round, that's when you have it. And if you want to specialize that, you have 45 seconds before the next round to do that and change your appearance as well if that's what you go for. And during that time. So you can do it in-game now, but we want it in-game in-game, in the deploy screen essentially. The reason it's not there now is because we hit a bunch of snags with that. There's so many backend systems that need to jive together. It was just not stable enough for us to do it, so we saved it. We need to do it well, otherwise it won't do good. So we did it in between rounds instead, where it's much more controlled environment. In general, yes, we're going to approach UI as we do everything with this game. We're going to revamp, improve, increase fidelity wherever we can, and of course listen to feedback. Just up very shortly, we're going to look at the deploy screen and what we call the parrot cam, probably marrying those together, maybe add a tactical overlay to the deploy screen for squad leaders and or people interested in more of that, especially given how we want you to think about the strategic resources like supply stations, vehicles and so on in the map. But we don't want to overwhelm people either, which is also why we have that 15 seconds pre-round phase for the first spawn, for everyone to just get into the game, get told what is this about, hold more flags than the other team. There's 15 seconds of guaranteed you're not going to die, and you see everyone run in one direction, so you probably follow them. So that we hope that is a much nicer entryway into the first battlefield actual gameplay than previous, because then you got a giant deploy screen with a lot of icons on it, and if you're a new player, that is overwhelming for sure.
Weapon bloat is something that's been a thing ever since Battlefield 4, but with BF5 you also have the issue of the whole multiple weapon variations. Instead of just doing loadouts, of course it was a bit different with BF1, but why did you decide to go in this direction with the weapons, and will you confirm that you don't intend to oversaturate the weapons field?
Yes, I can start with the final bit. Yes, we won't oversaturate. That's the whole point. I mean, we get flack for not having enough content, but I keep answering quality over quantity, and that should hold true throughout this live service as well. Because we want the gunplay direction, if we talk about guns specifically, and this is across the board of course, in this game, is about making everything feel and play differently. And that's also why we did the specializations over having something like what we had in BF4 or BF3, because they don't really have that big of an impact. It's a slight percentage change, but if you pick quick sling on the Lee Enfield rifle in this game, it is a insta scope headshot machine, close range.
That's what I always said about loadouts.
Yeah, this allows us to push that much harder and still keep it balanced. I think that's the big win here for us, and it also includes actually changing how the weapon looks. So it's sort of the best of all worlds hybrid model for us. And of course we can go super wide if we wanted to. Here's a weapon that's super extensive, like the STG or a similar modern, more modular gun, even for the time. Yeah. We can go wider and let's add another leg of specializations, because in the end of the war they did something else. Yeah. That's always a possibility with this as well, where the flattened structure of BF1, it's a new gun, quote unquote, and in BF4 it's really hard to balance. Yeah.
I've been really impressed with the maps in terms of the space and balance throughout. In the past we've had, of course, criticism with some map designs, especially remembering back to Rush maps. Mm-hmm. People often feel that they've just been kind of forced into a map rather than being more carefully considered for the most optimal gameplay. And Rush is a very great mode. There's loads of different modes which this can apply to. Is this something you guys are really aware of and plan to ensure, especially with the return of Rush in Tides of War, that the maps are not just slotted into existing maps with, not too much thought in terms of how it's going to affect that, but very carefully planned through to ensure that Rush is given the same consideration in terms of importance as, say, Conquest? Mm-hmm. Also, is there any possibility of some exclusive Rush maps at all?
So thank you for the great feedback on the base maps, and yes, we do want to have that continue, and the reason they are good is because we did handcraft and said we do not have to push every mode into every map where it doesn't fit. And when it comes to Rush, the planned release of Rush, the temporary release of Rush, if you will, and the reason for it being temporary is very much that. We want to handcraft a couple of experiences in Rush, and I'm talking classic Rush, i.e. BC2, BF3 style Rush maps, which is, I know, what players are asking for when they say Rush. Everyone else got Rush mainstream, which is Breakthrough. That is Rush mainstream. It's 64 players, it's linear, it's much wider, of course, it's 64 players. It's a crazy chaotic version of it, but if you say I like Rush and I like Rush from the beginning, you probably like a linear map that actually has choke points where you strategically push as a defender into the choke point and hold them. You know all these things, of course. And that's what we're going for. But of course, with this game as a template and the tempo of this game is the controller, so we will have to make a hybrid version of it. But it will very much be a specific layout. Yes, it will use maps that we already have, but we have a new system in place now where we can lock down the base map and then do additions or changes on top of it that is not just the layout of the game, but also like remove the house, change the mountain, or whatever. So that's what we're going to do with these, both Squad Conquest, which to me sort of appeals to the same audience but a generation older. You played BF2, you played 16-player Conquest in BF2, you controlled vehicles and so on. So yes, that's why we're also testing it through Tides of War, throwing it out there, testing probably one crazy layout that people are going to be like, what? And then one classical one and maybe one that we think this is where we want to go. And then we see what flies the best. And then it's taking off, which I expect it to be honest. We'll do more. And maybe even specific maps for it. And they don't have to be giant 64-player maps because Rush is 32 players. It needs to be.
Can you elaborate on the temporariness?
Yeah, so the temporariness is essentially, Tides of War to us is a great focal driver. So if you think about battlefields in the past, Premium divided the player base. And now we remove that, so we have one player base. But in a smaller region, for instance, it's really hard to find anything but Conquest to play, because there's nothing pointing you at what's today's play. What should we play today? Right? Tides of War helps us there, because Tides of War is focusing on specific things. So if we want to test something like Rush and show players that never played real Rush, quote unquote, what it really is, Tides of War is a perfect vehicle for it. Put it in there as a node in a week. It's the focal point of that week. Players play it, give us great feedback. Hopefully the old school players love it, and then we go from there. And temporary means...
But it will stay in the game.
Yeah, of course, we don't remove anything. And if and when we add controls for players to create their own experiences, you can always play all the experiences in the game, of course. This is just a way for us to make sure people fill up servers properly. And not only play one mode, of course. We want to, yeah.
So let's go straight from that and ask about custom servers. So we're going to have it after release. And when it comes to custom servers, I think basically people don't want what we had in BF1, and it's very, very obvious that custom servers are critical, especially for older players, to have the kind of experiences that we had in the past, to build a community that wants to play a certain way around a certain server so that you can maintain that. And that's what Battlefield has always been about, like building those internal communities and making sure that you can get those really, if you want to have like a really focused experience, you can find a server that's going to have that, and that the game master, the server owner, can tailor it to that end. I don't know how much you can say, but is it going to be more like BF4, BF3 when it comes to the servers?
I can't say much, unfortunately. I wish I could. I know how important this is. I've done extensive research on what players say when they ask for RSP, which is sort of the acronym used in this grouping of things, because there's so many different types of groups interested. It's either you're a giant platoon or a clan, and you just want to organize and play together or play against others for that matter. And then there's what you say, it's like the cheers setup, where this is the server I always go to. Here everyone knows who I am, sort of. I don't know them all, but it's the same players, you play a certain way. And what we want is to make sure that we build something that flies and works in that regard from most of our players. And we would start small and make sure that we build something everyone wants, and probably include everyone in that process as well. We have a platform to build this kind of thing already. It's not like it's eons away. It isn't. It's just deciding on exactly what we're doing and what we're not doing. And when it comes to the question about BF4 and what we did then, we had third-party server hosters and that kind of thing. That won't happen. We can't do that because giving away our server binaries, that was, in hindsight, a mistake, especially how much hand-holding we had to do to make that work. We're going to go wide, and now we have more server regions than we've ever had before. We probably cover enough of the globe for that to work regardless. But the key here is for players to have control over their own destiny when it comes to what they play, and we really, really want that. So that's all I can say, unfortunately. I wish I could give you details.
Following up on the maps, one big thing I noted was that on some of the more open maps, and open maps are problematic, especially when it comes with, they work for tanks, they work for aircraft, less for infantry. There's regularly quite few options for transport. I mean, we played a map today and it did feel a bit better on that map, but it's curious how between some of these open maps there seems to be like a differentiation between the amount of transport. And I found in some games that I might spend anything like literally 50% of my round just running between bases over extreme distance. So is this something you're going to look at, especially on these larger maps like Hamada? You're going to add some more transport or?
So yes, it's a notable. When we did the Panzerstorm, which is the map we're adding in the first chapter of Tides of War, which is focused on tanks heavily, which means it's very open. It's more open than any of the large, like Hamada, at least, you can snake around the edges and so on. It's less flat open. This is rolling hills open, which is more open. Sure, there's some bushes and trees and stuff hiding you and some trenches, but it's more open than it is. You really need transports. And currently in the game is a system similar to what it was in BF1, where they spawn on demand. And right now, the tuning of that is not awesome, and we don't really like the system, so we're going to change it. We actually had a playtest the other day on Twisted Steel, where we had 12 tanks on each side, plus every transport spawned in the map, just as a tech test. And that seemed to be a better performing server than when we spawned them on demand, because spawning is actually expensive. So what we probably will end up with in a very patch coming soon would be to just have all the transport vehicles actually spawn, because there's a lot of them in all those maps. Once they actually spawn, it's like 3 at each flag, so you have a plethora of options. But right now you normally walk close enough for them to start the spawning process, and then you're like, there's nothing here, I walk away, and then they spawn behind you. So if you don't look at the minimap, you're going to miss them.
A lot of people don't even know that.
Yeah, so we're going to change that. I really dislike that system.
So, David, one of the biggest and, I guess, ongoing issues with the game has always been balancing, and a lot of people have often talked about a ladder system or just matchmaking in general. This still seems to be an issue, and I guess perhaps it's never going to go away, but is this something you're aware of, and what are you doing to try and ensure that it's better for Battlefield 5?
Yes, it's absolutely something we think about, and with this game, since we're upping the skill ceiling, we're making it focused around ADSing and shooting people in the head to kill them quicker. Players that are really good are going to have a bigger impact on the players that are mediocre or mid-range even and down, which is obviously something that can destroy a game for someone mediocre or middle ground or just an average player like me. If I had a really good player against me, it will feel almost to a point of grief when we up the skill ceiling, right? Because we enable them, but we also enable me to get better at the game. We're considering this through two new stats that we're using for our matchmaker, and a new way of looking at matchmaking in general. So the one is time to kill. It's essentially a logical setup of the engagement you're in a one-on-one with a player. How long does it take for you to kill him? And if you hit him in the head enough, you're going to have a really short time here. That's skill on that side, on aiming, right? And on the other, in a one-on-one, not when there's more than one damaging party. And the same goes for time to death, which is how good are you at avoiding getting shot in the head, which is also a skill. And those two combined, if you have both, you're a really good player, and you're going to be able to destroy your opponents in this game, which is why we're using those as our skill matchmaker, and try to put those players that are the top X% of the skill base in those properties on an island. We're trying to lift them out of the game, because in general the rest of the player base is fine playing together. It's the balancer of the teams will sort that, but there will be outliers, like really good players could make the experience bad for others, and that's something we want to avoid, right? But this is an ongoing thing. It won't be perfect. It is a big change. I had data scientists in Redwood Shores work on this new model with AI modeling and crazy stuff. It seems to be working fine in theory. We'll see at launch how well it behaves, but that's the idea, and we are constantly going to monitor it, because that's the worry. We're opening Pandora's box a little bit here. If you had a problem with bombers in BF1 because AA wasn't spawned in and someone's using a tank instead, this is sort of the even worse version of that. If you have a server where someone could really dominate the other team.
Why is it a worse version?
Because that's not fun, right? This is a game that needs to be fun for players. If we want servers to actually play to the end of the round and not have people leave, it needs to be fun. It needs to be fun in losing as well. So I think it's key to have an even playing field where the difference between your skill and someone on the other team or your team isn't too great, right? That's key.
So the core objective is still to balance players between sides.
That's the step number 2. Step number 1 is balancing them per server. That has not been done before. Before it was just
the amount of players in each server.
Yeah. Yeah, that's happening, of course. So once you fill a server, then the sides will be balanced. But we also make sure that you never leave your squad. You're always going to be on the same side. So that is obviously an unbalancing factor.
Yeah, and that's an important thing to keep people together.
Yes, it's more important than anything, because that is the fun enabler too. So that needs to trump it. So it's going to be a balancing act. Yeah.
As you know, I was never a big fan of BF1 particularly, also Hardline. So coming back to this game is a really good thing for me. I like it. Battlefield 5 generally so far to me feels very, very different. A very good experience, which certainly is fun to play as a squad. More importantly, this is the first time in years that I've seen veteran players that I know, and also my audience, who say they've played the game in, say, the beta, and are actually looking to get back into it. I haven't seen this for some time. Was this an active intention in Battlefield 5 to attract these players back to the franchise? And what do veteran players mean? More importantly, what role do you feel veterans play in terms of game cohesion? So one, was it intentional? And two, what role do veterans play in cohesion?
Yes, it was absolutely intentional. I am a veteran myself. I just happen to be on the developer side of things, and I make games for me as well as players out there, just inclusive other types as well. Yes, it's super important to me. I think this game, we're going back to our roots. It's a restart, if you will, from a gameplay perspective. Sure, it's modernized. We're not doing exactly what we did before, but we want a game where you have to think, and that is very much. The pacing we had before was slower than it is today, of course, especially when it's high intensity now. It's much higher than it ever was. But we hope those lulls that we try to create with this game create some of that downtime to make it more intense when it actually is intense, which is what you felt when you played the older games. And to me, I think veteran players, and there's a bunch of different types of those as well. There's veteran players coming even back from the early PC era and the original game and BF2. And then there's the whole BF3 crowd, which is ginormously big, and there's a whole console add-on with the BC2 crowd, so Rush veterans, if you will. And there's a bunch of those little plethora there. But the key thing is, if we can attract them now, we did the right thing, because I think those games that we had back then, they were even more sticky than the games we have had in between, and sticky in a service is king. That's what you want. You want a game that people come back to and play just because it's fun running around. And I think we are hitting this in this game. We can always be better, but that's really what we're focusing on. And I think the veterans bring something to the table, and that's a big one. It's maturity. It is hopefully pacing the whole community down a notch. And since we want you to think, maybe they can teach new players something as well. So I hope there is a marriage, if you will, here, a melding of those two things. This new giant flock of players from BF1 and other titles and the old together, because I think there is something really nice there, because there are roles for everyone in that fits you on the battlefield. So yes, and I'm very happy to hear that you're saying that, because it's my sort of key focus.
So big thanks to David for doing the QA with me, and I can't ask everything that I want because we always have a limited amount of time at these kind of events. However, he did agree to come back to talk to me again in the new year, break down where the game is at, how things are at that point in time, so we can look forward to that in the new year. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, if you enjoyed, drop a like. I'll see you next time.